Good morning and welcome to San Francisco Interfaith Council's online briefing for faith leaders. Today's program addresses the impact of COVID-19 on transportation in San Francisco. A special thanks, the San Francisco Interfaith Council's online briefings are supported by a grant from MediFund. Thank you. The important ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. San Francisco and surrounding counties are requiring masking in indoor public places for everyone as a precaution against the increased circulation of COVID-19. This includes settings like houses of worship, grocery or retail stores, theaters, and family entertainment centers. Anyone 12 and older will need to show proof of vaccination to go indoors in some places in San Francisco's, like bars, restaurants, clubs, gyms, large indoor events, and any business or event serving food or drinks indoors. To find your vaccination record, go to myvaccinerecord.cdph.ca.gov. Get vaccinated, San Francisco. The vaccines are safe and effective. Go to sf.gov/get vaccinated to find a vaccine site in your neighborhood. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco, because together we can stop anti-Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. As a transit-first city, San Francisco is committed to lowering carbon emissions, encouraging travel by cycling and public transportation, and minimizing the use of automobiles. Of the many sectors dramatically impacted by the COVID-19, transit in our city has not been exempt from the pandemic's wide net. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council, welcomes San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency Director Jeff Tumlin, who will discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on the SFMTA's ability to restore and provide service, the process being undertaken to determine the next round of service restorations, and the agency's financial outlook for the foreseeable future. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the new chair of the board of directors of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Nancy Nielsen. Nancy, I almost gave you a new position. Welcome, and we thank you for being with us today to welcome on behalf of the board of directors.
Thank you, Michael. It is indeed my honor and a blessing to be in this position today. And as such, I want to offer the statement that is read at every gathering around who we are and why we are here. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world.
Thank you, Nancy, and bless you for all that you do, both for the council and the community.
Thank you.
I have the distinct pleasure and privilege this morning of welcoming the very Reverend Dr. Kirill Sokolov. Father Kirill is a friend and colleague. He is the Dean of Holy Trinity Orthodox Cathedral, which happens to be on Van Ness Avenue and has a front row seat to the Van Ness construction. And we welcome you, Father Kirill. Your community is the oldest Orthodox community in the lower 48, as I understand. And so please guide us in a reflective moment.
Thank you, Michael. It's a joy to be in this group this morning. When I was reflecting about what I might say and trying to enter a spirit of prayer, I was unexpectedly filled with gratitude this morning for our public transit system in a way that I didn't expect. I was thinking about my own high school years here growing up in San Francisco and how the availability of Muni meant for me a kind of freedom that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I remember going to a college visit and calling up the local pastor and asking if I could visit their church. And I just said, oh, I would take the bus. And I never heard the end of it because it was impossible there. But growing up here in San Francisco, I always thought it was possible for me to be autonomous, for me to have that freedom. So I'm grateful for all of the blessings we have in this city, including the multitude of faith traditions present and all of our churches, all of our communities, all of our houses of worship. My heart has been filled, though, with grief this week, hearing the news from around the world, the increasing cases of COVID in our own city, the tragedy in Afghanistan, which somehow even touches my own parish with people who lived there and worked there. And I would just like to offer a short prayer from our prayer book, one that I found that I never really paid attention to until today. Just kind of when I opened my book, it appeared and it really speaks to me today. So I'd like to share this prayer with all of us. It's a prayer that seeks to calm all of those thoughts that I have, that hopelessness, that helplessness, maybe I want to say, around these big problems, these huge challenges that we face in our world and our society. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. Lord, uphold my soul and deliver it from confusion, doubt, and wavering, and strengthen it in faith. Drive all attacks away from me and cut off my sinful and blind self-will. Grant me the strength to commend myself, my soul and body, my obstacles, the present, the future, those near to my heart, and all my neighbors here and around the world, unto thine all-holy and all-wise will. And therefore may thy will ever be announced to me. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father. And as you were speaking, I was remembering your parents of blessed memory and your father who served Holy Trinity with such faith and beauty. And it was a blessing to have him as the pastor and the dean of the cathedral. And now you follow so faithfully and honor his memory as well as lead your community. God bless you. I have the great privilege today to welcome back. You know, when we invite somebody back to make an encore, it's because of the importance of their position, but also the impact they made the first time. And so Jeff Tumlin, the director of the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency, is in a very unique position to share with us today the news of both the restoration of Muni and its financial outlook. But he also, it's important that he's speaking to this audience today because we are everywhere. When I sit in my office, I look at a map of the 800 facilities owned by religious institutions in San Francisco, not to mention those who come from outside of San Francisco to our communities of worship and houses of faith. So Jeff, you started this, your work. I can only say that because you're in this audience. It seemed to be a baptism of fire. I remember sitting in your office just before the pandemic, and then I bat my eyelashes, and it was a new reality. I just wanted to commend you on how the grace that you have exhibited in navigating the city through this in your capacity. And I want to hand the floor off to you because I think that you have some important things to share with us. And I want you to know that we are here to work with you collaboratively so that we can support the city and support the important work of Muni.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for your kind words. I've always appreciated your counsel as well as the opportunity to speak to your group. It's one of my favorite groups in San Francisco. And as you mentioned, these are remarkably challenging times in so many ways. Over the last 18 months, we've had to completely rebuild the Muni system 5 times. We're continuing to face by far the worst financial crisis in our agency's 110-year history. We have an ongoing health crisis as we struggle to get our entire workforce vaccinated. And we're also dealing with a long overdue reckoning around racial equity all at the same time and all in compounded and interrelated ways. I am so proud of my team who have worked so hard to confront all of these issues with grace and candor, with the acknowledgement that there's no way we can succeed at dealing with all of this at once. And most importantly, in the spirit of service. It's actually the one factor that has helped me to continue showing up and working hours that I do every single day because of the way my team shows up in service, knowing that our work is essential for allowing San Francisco to get through the pandemic and to support our economic recovery, as well as to correct for decades of misinvestment. So this is a kind of tedious presentation about our fiscal reality and our plans for moving forward. So let me share my screen and I will launch into a PowerPoint deck that I will try to make as accessible as possible. So hopefully that is popping up on your screens.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, let me dive in. So as I mentioned, we are facing the most intense array of crises in our agency's history. And we've been working very hard to make adjustments every step of the way in order to support our role in advancing equity in San Francisco, supporting a sense of community, and setting up San Francisco for a strong economic recovery. And we're very fortunate, despite many weaknesses at SFMTA, we have excellent data. And so every step of the way, we've been finding new ways in order to use data in order to make the most out of every single dollar and every single service hour and every hour of staff time in the agency. And yet, we are struggling. We understand that we play a critical role in supporting San Francisco's economic recovery, but we're also dependent upon the San Francisco economy for our own existence. It's important to remind everyone that the SFMTA is set up as an enterprise organization. We're separate from the rest of the city budget, and we're designed to be self-funded. Historically, our primary sources of funding have been our transit fares and our parking revenue. Both transit fares and parking revenue completely collapsed during the pandemic. And unlike other transit agencies around the country, we're not expecting those revenues to come back for a very long time. We work closely with the San Francisco Controller's Office to track every single economic indicator in the city. And we're bracing for a slow recovery, particularly given the very slow return to downtown San Francisco office. So our transit ridership on weekends is basically up to pre-COVID levels on our high frequency lines, but on the lines that serve the downtown, no one's going downtown, particularly to the financial district, largely due to the unique nature of the San Francisco economy, where downtown jobs are very heavily tech, financial services, and professional services, the sort of jobs that lend themselves very well to work from home. And that, as a result of that, we know that our parking and transit fare revenue will come back, but likely not until 2025 at the soonest. So we're incredibly grateful that we received just over $1 billion from the federal government. We spent half of that last year just to avoid massive layoffs. We're spending another $300 million to close the book this year with significantly reduced service. The remainder of that money needs to last us either through full San Francisco recovery or at least until we identify and win a new source of operating revenue. So we're working very hard to make sure that we allocate our federal relief money responsibly and protect our workforce and protect the service. So that's our challenge. We need to spread that money out because we also need to make sure that we are here in order to support the city's economic recovery through 2025. So our path is about how to calibrate service restoration. Right now, the limit on service restoration is really the pace of hiring, but starting sometime in 2022, we're going to need to make some hard choices about how to allocate our limited resources. Over how many years do we need to spread that money? We know that if we invested our federal relief money too quickly, if we went to 100% service restoration this year, that would be great. People would be really happy. We'd have the same service that we had back in 2019, but then our federal money runs out in 2023, well before ridership bounces back. And the result of that would be rapid service cuts in 23. People would stop taking transit. Transit would fail to support the city's economic recovery. And we would end up in what is called a transit death spiral, a fate we want to avoid. But by the same token, if we invested too slowly in the city's recovery, then there wouldn't be enough transit service in order to support access to all those jobs downtown as they come back. And as a result, people would not take transit and we would end up in a very similar death spiral. So what we're looking for is a calibrated Goldilocks approach rooted in the data that's coming from the controller's office. What we're looking at is keeping our service hours or service delivery in the dark blue line well above our actual ridership. So back in 2019, our service hours and our ridership matched. We're now delivering about twice as many service hours as we have ridership because we know we need to stay ahead of the city's economic recovery. We just can't go too fast. And the result of this is we're seeing really strong trends in increasing ridership, particularly after last weekend's service enhancements. What we're finding is that high quality, high frequency service is what is really driving our ridership expansion. So our goals are, how do we not just throw every hour of service that we've got kind of randomly out there until we get back to where we were in 2019, but to be smart about it, and particularly to deliver fast, frequent, reliable, predictable service focused on neighborhoods that have the fewest mobility choices, using our data in order to allocate every service hour based upon where the need is, and very importantly, address the dramatic changes in travel behavior that COVID accelerated. As I mentioned before, since the 19th century, Muni has been organized around giving everyone a one-seat ride to the financial district. our ridership isn't in the financial district anymore. It's in the neighborhood commercial centers, it's to hospitals, it's to shopping on the weekends, it's to places like Mission Bay. We need to rethink Muni in order to address the fact that travel behavior has dramatically changed since the last time we did a major service restoration or a reorganization. That said, we've rebuilt Muni 5 times over the last 18 months. Rebuilding Muni is something that we typically do about every 15 years. We did it 5 times in 18 months. Our transit planning crew is exhausted. They're at about a 50% vacancy rate, just as we're still dealing with the hiring freeze for a year and a half. And now we're taking the time in order to do our next round of service enhancement in a way that is a lot more engaged with the public. So after our August 15th service restoration that we just completed, between now and winter of 2022, we're going to be engaged in a public planning process, looking at a variety of different ways to do our next round of service restoration this coming winter. Meanwhile, back in a week and a half ago on August 15th, we did a major round of service enhancement, basically restoring about 24 transit routes and making major improvements to others. So right now, we're operating Muni service in every single neighborhood. We've restored most of the system. We're also continuing to operate our main lines faster, more frequently, and more reliably than Muni has in decades. And as a result of that, lines like the 8 and the 9, the 14 Mission, the 38 Geary, ridership on those lines, particularly on the weekends, is nearly at, and in some cases exceeding, pre-COVID levels of ridership. There's about 6 lines that we're still not operating. All of those lines have another more frequent route that is within 1 to 2 blocks from that line. And the result of that is that since August, over 98% of San Franciscans are within 2 to 3 blocks of the Muni line. And about half of San Franciscans are within a short walk of a line that is, again, operating faster, more frequently, and more reliably than it did pre-COVID. The other thing, again, we want to study more is how has travel behavior changed? COVID revealed the geography of essential workers. So when you subtract out white-collar professionals working in the financial district, travel patterns in San Francisco are really, really different and quite interesting. When you also bore down and look at demographics, it gets even more interesting and allows us to really focus on the equity data and to use our values in order to better allocate our limited service hours. So right now we're getting started on our winter 2022 Muni service network planning. And we'll be looking at 3 different route structures. One is what we're calling the familiar network, basically what we were operating in 2019. Another is a sort of more extreme version of what we retreated to in early COVID, which is focusing on really, really fast, frequent, and reliable service on our core routes. And this is the key tension that we always have to deal with in transit, is to what degree do you provide so-so transit service that is within a block of everyone, which is very convenient for people with mobility disabilities, people who have a hard time walking, versus investing in really fast, frequent, and reliable service that is farther away. And there's no correct technical answer. This is a value judgment. And therefore, the kind of conversation that is typically very hard for San Francisco to have, but I think people in your communities are quite used to using values in order to talk about how to make hard decisions. And then, of course, as always, we'll be doing a third option that is a hybrid, trying to pick the best elements of both options and recognize the specific geographic disparities in San Francisco. So that work began earlier this month. It's going to continue with some scenario development this month. We'll be doing a lot of public feedback in September and October. And then hopefully bringing recommendations to our board and likely the San Francisco Board of Supervisors towards the end of the year so that we can implement in winter of 2022. And for more detail on that, you can go to sfmta.com/2022network. And I can put that as well in the chat, along with a bunch of other links I put in the chat. So all that is well and good, but it doesn't help us to do smart planning about the future if we're still facing the dire financial constraints that we're facing now. So we know that in order to get the transportation system that San Francisco needs, we need a completely different approach to revenue. Our key sources of revenue have been in steady decline relative to our expenses for decades. Our expenses rise with the cost of labor. So our expenses rise with Bay Area or San Francisco cost of living, because it's essential that we pay our workers a living wage. Meanwhile, our revenues rise at best with inflation, and our key sources of revenue, like parking, have been in steady decline because Uber and Lyft are destroying our parking revenue. Meanwhile, our commitment to equity is making our transit fare revenue also decline relative to our expenses. So we have to find a new way of funding Muni. Otherwise, we end up just having to shrink the system every year until we find that new source of revenue. And we've known about this for decades. Every 5 years, we're audited. Every 5 years, everyone concludes, oh, Muni has a massive and growing structural deficit. We should do something about this. And every year, nothing is done. And instead, we're forced to quietly cut service and paper over our problems by deferring maintenance or by relying on a strong economy and the San Francisco General Fund. So these are our financial projections. I'm not going to get into this in detail, but the pandemic has accelerated a long-term trend of a widening gap between our revenues and expenditures. And the divergence point is right now, you can see in the gold line our current revenue projections for the future, and in the purple and the blue lines, the need. So we have to do something urgently in 2022 in order to either bring these lines closer together or figure out what we're slashing. Let's talk about what is important to San Franciscans. So a couple of months ago, we did a detailed community survey trying to figure out how to position ourselves for the ballot in 2022 and to figure out what San Franciscans want from their mobility system. And their answers were very clear. We presented a lot of choice exercises to poll respondents to ask them, what's more important to you, this or that, or order these in order of priority. And everyone agreed that Muni is absolutely essential to San Francisco. Like, that was no surprise. They also, San Franciscans, made it clear what their priorities were in terms of funding. And this was a little surprising to us, just how strong the reaction was. San Franciscans feel very strongly that we need to invest in equity. We need to focus on better mobility choices for people who have the fewest choices, whether that's people with disabilities or low-income people or people living in neighborhoods that have suffered historic disinvestment. And so that is very much in alignment with our own agency values and what we strive to do more than ever during COVID. The other thing that was surprising to us is how much San Franciscans prioritized fast, frequent, reliable, convenient transit. 80% focused on quick and convenient. 76% focused on reducing delays and making it more reliable, including reducing crowding. We did not expect these numbers to be this high, particularly compared to other types of investments that we might make. But it is very much, again, in alignment with what we strive to do during COVID. The thing I think that was most surprising is just how much San Franciscans recognize that papering over our financial problems by deferring maintenance is like paying your rent on your credit cards. San Franciscans recognize that our system is decrepit. All you need to do is to take the subway and see the lack of reliability in the subway, and you know that we are not spending the right amount of money on maintenance. And San Franciscans see this. And this was particularly unusual because typically when we do polls like this nationally, people just want fun new things and don't care about taking care of the existing system. Safety and accessibility were also important to San Franciscans. Basically, our findings from the community survey were that the values and priorities for San Franciscans as a whole were very much in alignment with our own policy documents, plans, and agency values. So that's how we've been building our budget strategy, our capital plan, and are thinking about new ballot measures for new funding to focus on a fast, frequent, and reliable transit network, basically a network of lines running every 5 minutes all day long, connecting all neighborhoods to each other, focusing on dealing with our deferred maintenance problems so that the system is actually reliable, and then focusing on safety and accessibility, making the street safer through Vision Zero investments and making the transit system and the overall transportation system universally accessible. So in terms of thinking about how do we achieve all of this, we did some budgeting exercises around 3 different approaches. One is implementing a full vision of a transportation system that San Francisco needs and deserves. If we didn't have a budget limitation and we just focused on need, what would that look like? We did another scenario that focused largely on state of good repair and what that can deliver in terms of reliability. And then finally, a third scenario that was a more balanced approach, focusing on everything. Of course, implementing a vision that is what San Franciscans told us they wanted, we would need another billion with a B, another $1 billion a year, every year in order to do that. And it would take us about 20 years to build out that network. We know that that is very unlikely to be achievable, particularly in this economy. So the other 2 options were about between $270 million and $300 million a year, above and beyond what we currently have. There is obviously a substantial gap for all of those. And so in order to even start to improve the system, we're going to need at least $150 million a year in new, sustained, ongoing operating revenue every year in order to get there. So the next question is, how on earth would we achieve that? How could we raise new revenue in a way that the voters would agree to with a 2/3 vote, that would be sustainable over time, and that would be equitable, and that wouldn't destroy the San Francisco economy? So we looked at every single possible option, building upon past polling and community survey work. We go through this exercise every 5 years. And there's an array of things that we could chase on the June or November 2022 ballots. I won't get into that detail here. But they raise, a potentially substantial amount of money, not the amount of money that we need, but the amount of money that we could correct for the structural deficit gap and start putting us on a path of recovery that would allow us to rebuild trust with the San Francisco voters. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy, I'm not sure where we are on time, but I'm happy to take questions if time allows. And meanwhile, I'll look forward to coming back to you all once we figure out what our strategy is for the 2022 ballot, because we're going to need support from wherever we can get it. And with that, I will stop. Thank you so much.
Jeff, thank you so much. You know what? I'm going to ask a question before I introduce our community panelists, because it's sort of the elephant in the room. We've got this new administration. We've got a great director of the Department of Transportation in Pete Buttigieg. We've got an infrastructure bill. How does San Francisco aim to benefit from the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing that is very strange, particularly in the public sector, is the firewall between operating budget and capital budget. So the $1 billion that we're expecting from the federal government, that is operating budget support. Our operating budget is the budget that is most hurting. And what's been made pretty clear to us in both state and federal sources is we can't expect any more operating dollars. We're on our own. We need to close our operating budget structural deficit locally. The infrastructure bill is aimed at capital. And what we're trying to do is to set up the agency to be able to receive what will be a completely unpredictable amount of capital money. And we want to make sure that the capital money that we receive, that we can use that money in order to improve our operating efficiency. and otherwise create operating budget savings. So for example, the transit priority project that we're doing on Geary right now, phenomenally cost effective, really, really quick. We're doing transit only lanes, we're changing the signal timing, we're putting in new pedestrian crosswalks. It's already allowing us to achieve 20% speed and reliability savings on the 38 period. That speed and reliability savings, we can in turn invest in better frequency at no cost to our operating budget. So we're using capital on Geary in order to save on our operating budget and improve our efficiency. So what we're trying to do is to change the rules at the state and the federal level in order to reward those projects that improve efficiency and that can deliver those efficiency improvements quickly. Like, we don't want, frankly, to do another Van Ness kind of project that takes 20 years and costs a lot of money and takes forever in order to deliver any benefits. We want to do more projects like Geary, where we can go from project conception to project completion in 9 months, be on budget and on schedule and already delivering direct benefits in order to save the agency's budget and to deliver real benefits to our riders and to our business people. So that's basically what the strategy is. And happily, we've got really, really good partners at the federal government. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for saving our democracy, as well as a really strong legislative contingency in the state legislature as well.
Excellent. And I know I was speaking with Father Kittle before, and he's praying for the end of the Van Ness construction. And so we...
As are we all.
Prayers count.
Into this year, so another thing we've been able to do is to dramatically improve delivery on Van Ness. I don't know if you guys all paid attention to the work that we did at South Van Ness and Mission. Rather than taking 5 months and incrementally torturing motorists and taking forever to rebuild that intersection, we did the whole thing in a long weekend. And that took a lot of risk and a huge amount of coordination across over a dozen teams. It was wildly successful. It's sort of demonstrating not only the lessons that we've learned from past failures, but also that a new approach of taking more risk, doing a lot more collaboration and coordination across agencies and with our contractor partners is really bearing fruit. It's saving us money, it's saving us time, and it's allowing us to do delivery in a much more effective way.
Thank you. I had the good fortune of serving on what was at that time the Disabilities and Aging Adults Commission. And Diane Lawrence, who is one of our staff people there, is on the line. And she reminded me that by 2030, 30% of San Francisco residents are going to be seniors. And so we wanted to welcome Vision Zero Education and Outreach Coordinator, Win No, to just speak a little bit about Vision Zero, and then to pose a question to you at the conclusion of her remarks. Win, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Just like Michael said, I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about one of our citywide initiatives called Vision Zero, which is actually one of our priorities here at SFMTA. And I'm going to share my screen. Trey, if you could please let me share again. Great, thank you. Could someone verbally let me know that they can see the screen?
Yes.
Good.
Great, thank you. So what exactly is Vision Zero? This is in 2014, the city adopted the citywide initiative called Vision Zero, which is our commitment to end traffic deaths by 2024. So we know that every year, about 30 people lose their lives on our San Francisco streets, and 500 more are severely injured each year. We as a city take the stance that traffic deaths are preventable, and it's unacceptable that these happen. So we're committed to transforming our transportation system by prioritizing investments in our most vulnerable communities through strategies like street engineering, policy work, and culture change. San Francisco was the second city in the US to adopt Vision Zero, and since then, many other cities are working to advance this really ambitious goal. This graph shows San Francisco traffic deaths since 2005. And we know that at the height of COVID during shelter in place, many people were stuck inside their homes, and that meant much less foot traffic, much less road traffic. And while we had 5 less pedestrian deaths as compared to 2019, we also know that speeds increased, and we saw more motorcycle and solo vehicle crashes in 2019. It resulted in the same amount of crashes with 1 additional death, which brought us to 30 for 2020. We know because of the pandemic, 2020 was an anomalous year, but we know Vision Zero is possible, that it's the right goal, and we're doing everything we can to make our streets safer. So I work specifically on education and communications for Vision Zero. I try to do the long game of trying to change hearts and minds around norms for traffic behavior. And also I'm trying to create traffic safety champions. So I wanted to walk you through one of our recent campaigns that we launched to try to make left turns safer and how COVID impacted it. So for background, unsafe left turns are a problem nationally that many cities are trying to work on. Here in San Francisco, we know it's a top crash factor for people who are walking and biking. In 2019, we know that 40% of our traffic deaths involved a left turning vehicle. And so the city is trying to do 2 things to address this problem. So we installed a street pilot called the Left Turns Traffic Calming project, where we installed these physical treatments into the street to see if they can make left turns safer. And we also launched a citywide campaign called Safety It's Your Turn. I'm just gonna have these videos playing on loop so you can see how these physical street treatments slow down drivers making left turns and kind of encourage more of a 90-degree turn, like a sharper square turn, which allows them more time to see people who are in the crosswalk. I want to give a huge thanks to our heroes at the paint and sign shops here at MTA, who installed these at 7 locations citywide at the height of COVID, while they were there are so many other demands that they were scrambling to do in terms of COVID response. COVID delayed our data collection for this project because of the decrease in foot and road traffic. But thankfully, we had control intersections where we collected pre and mid and post data so that we were able to see if there were any significant changes here that we could attribute to these treatment sites. And if we didn't have the control set up for this project, when COVID hit, it would have completely ruined this project. In terms of our campaign, Safety It's Your Turn, that we launched in tandem with the street pilot, because of COVID, we did much less one-on-one direct physical outreach that we typically did, and we had to move to a lot more non-contact strategies. So here we hung up posters, we went to a lot of merchants and businesses and asked if we could hang up posters, and we gave out hand sanitizers. We also went door to door or car to car and put up these door hangers. And then we also did a lot of the things that we typically do for our campaigns, where we trying to reach as many eyeballs as we can citywide. So we put our ads on buses, at our bus shelters. We did a lot of digital advertisement. We put ads in the newspaper, and we worked with Lyft and Waze to make sure to remind their drivers to turn left safely. And we also put out a radio ad, which I'm going to play just a few seconds of.
下一個路口左轉。
好。哎呀，快啲啦，快啲啦！哎呀，唔夠位轉左啦。
And with this project, we were also lucky enough to have grant funds that we could in turn fund 6 different community-based organizations throughout the city, so they could help work with their specific communities, whether it's youth, seniors, people with disabilities, people who primarily speak, only Chinese or Spanish. And you'll be hearing from Ashley Smiley from Bayview Opera House shortly. And so that's just a little bit about Vision Zero. I want to thank you so much again for having me here today.
Do you have any questions for your boss?
Sure. My question for Jeff is, you took this job pretty much at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm sure while you thought there might be some hard days, I'm sure you did not imagine that there would be a global pandemic happening. So I'm interested to hear what kind of life experiences helped see you through what continues to be a very, very hard days.
That's a good question. Well, since we're at the Interfaith Council, I guess I can actually come out and say that I just before deciding that I would put my hat in the ring for this job, I was on a 10-day meditation retreat, trying to figure out what to do next in my life, and I realized that I was in the point in my life where not only did I have the luxury of being able to pivot towards service, it was also really an obligation that I had benefited from a tremendous amount of privilege, and it was time to pay that back. And so in many ways, I made the decision to take this impossible job for not only the right reasons, but an essential primary reason in order to get through, for once in a lifetime crises that all intersected all at the same time. So, being in the spirit of service means that I can afford to take risks, that I can focus on motivational factors outside of myself. And that I can, work the hours that I do because, when I look at how to allocate my time, my contribution is always going to be greater to focus on helping San Francisco and helping the agency build. So thank you for that question in the context. I don't know. It's not something I often talk about.
Thank you for your openness and your candor in sharing that. And I came from a tradition where we pray for our civic officials and those who lead us. And so you have the confidence to know that there's a lot of people out there that are praying for you, the city, and all of those who have been charged with leading us. Bless you. When mentioned that funding opportunity came up for the Bayview Opera House, we have Ashley Smiley with us, who's the program manager, to give us the other end of as being a grant recipient. Ashley, are you there? I see her.
Yes, hello. Sorry, the program manager world never fails to put me in multiple places at one time. But yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Ashley Smiley. I am the current program manager for the Bayview Opera House. And because it's relevant, I'm also going to be beginning my PhD in historical and cultural studies in religion with a concentration in art and religion at the GTU this semester. So I felt like this was a proper place to go ahead and let people know about that. Yeah, so it was really beautiful to get to work with Vision Zero. We were a part of the Left Turn Project, and ultimately what we decided to do was a few things. One, we created a Bayview brochure that highlighted different areas where people can take the stairs and see different sites of the Bayview neighborhood, which we still have brochures. So when people want things in print, please let me know, because we have some. And that featured different community members like Jarrell Phillips, who teaches our Capoeira class, Angelique Tompkins, who's a part of the SF Links, And then also, because we are an arts organization, we commissioned 3 different videos. So one video is a claymation safety video, and that was created by Ahmad Walker. And that one was a lot of fun just because we got to see the background of that, and that was all about left turn safety. And then also we commissioned a dance video about like intersection safety, or also just, you know, things that can happen in the intersection when you are safe. And that was a dance collaboration with Push Dance. And then we also had another kind of like artistic intersection video featuring Malik Seneferu, and he did live painting. So we recorded him doing live painting, and then kind of edited the video down into a time lapse so that people could see that. But it was really fun to do that piece in particular because everyone knows Malik. And so when they were passing by, we actually saw people take caution because he was painting in the middle of an intersection. And like really, you know, widen their turns and then say hello. So that was a really beautiful experience for us all. Yeah, so that's in relation to our Vision Zero. Other updates for the Bayview Opera House in general, especially in terms of COVID, is of course we're a venue, and so we really got kind of shut down for the most of it, which meant that we just had to restructure and re-envision how we work with our community. And so we started to have food pantries with the SF Marin Food Bank in our parking lot every Monday during the morning. And then we were also reached out to by the San Francisco Department of Public Health. So every Monday and Thursday, we hold COVID testing for the community, which has been really instrumental, not only in making sure that we are investing in community safety, but also our numbers help track just where Bayview is in the city, and the rise and the resources that need to come to the community. We also got to do a lot of construction, which was really fantastic. We have brand new floors in all of our spaces, wooden floors. We're also doing kitchen renovations, getting a brand new blue curtain and stuff, so that when we are, you know, up and running, everyone can see us be really pretty. We have also really started inviting more community members to do things on our outdoor stage. So we've held some housing town halls. We had an outdoor Juneteenth celebration that featured Bayview artists, local artists. And then just recently, we held an outdoor concert with Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, a band called Spangalang that was led by Tony Lindsay, who was the lead singer for Santana for about 25 years. Also came out and performed, and then along with that there was COVID testing and COVID vaccinations. They'll be back in September, so I'll make sure that folks know about that. Indoors, we started slow. We have a candlelight event, which is classical music by candlelight. A string quartet comes in August. They did Mozart. In September they'll be doing Vivaldi, but that helped us really redefine what we're doing. So indoors, you know, no food, no drink. We cut our capacity down to half, where it was 300, the max is 150. Food and drink can be outdoors, you know, making sure that there's ample time to have proper ventilation with our windows and doors. And we also invested in air purifiers and things of that nature. We're really trying to make sure that the community does not lose the opportunity to participate in art and culture and experience art and culture. One thing that we realize is that people really want to gather, which is like touch and go in terms of safety. So we have been really focused on how we can make sure people can do that in a safe way, and really solidify ourselves in that way. We're also participating in Dream Keepers, and so we will actually have access to many grants for Black artists, and that will launch in September. And then we were also having a 2-track professional development course for artists, so performing artists and visual artists. the performing artists will have the opportunity to work with Opera Parallel, Marcus Shelby, and Peter Callender for a piece that they'll be doing at the Bayview Opera House, and visual artists will be creating an exhibit in tandem with that. And then in order to answer any potential questions, I'll just say I am actively always updating our calendar on our website. So please feel free to check it out at bvoh.org. We've got great stuff happening.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. I look forward to going back to the Bayview Opera House, and thank you for all that you're doing. Jeff, if you can rejoin us for a quick moment.
Yes.
Just a couple of quick questions. We have some from the floor, but I wanted to ask you two related to safety. I was on a call yesterday and didn't realize this, but we have a food insecurity issue in San Francisco, in particular related to the Asian community, because of fears of going out and being in public. I'm wondering if there's any message you can give to the Asian community about the safety of riding Muni. The other question I'm sure that's on a lot of people's minds is it safe to ride Muni in this period of pandemic?
Yeah, both very important questions. The easier one to answer is related to COVID safety, something that we have found from our own data and that every transit agency has found around the world is that public transit is not a place where people are getting COVID. We have amazingly good air circulation on all of our vehicles, particularly our buses, where our windows open and the air is changing over more often than it is outside. So we have had precisely 0 cases of known COVID transmission on Muni, which corresponds with the data that we're seeing from countries that have even stronger contact tracing than we do. Of greater concern, though, is personal security and the feelings of safety. So we know the science says that people are safe, but people don't make their decisions based upon the science. We're certainly seeing that with vaccination fear. People make decisions based upon feelings and emotions. So we want to make sure that everyone feels safe on Muni, which is why we're continuing to do extra cleaning on the system. And we're doing a lot of work focusing on personal security. Our actual statistics show that cases of assaults, either on our workforce or our passengers, are at a historic low on Muni. That said, concern about assault, particularly among our AAPI riders, is very real. And so we're playing our part training our operators in how to do get even better at de-escalation and prevention. We're also currently running a campaign for bystanders developed by the AAPI community about how, as a passenger, what you can do in order to reduce the rates of violence. And very importantly, helping to train everyone in reporting. One of the things that we really struggle with is the low rate of reporting both crime and violence by our AAPI and immigrant communities. We need to make sure that everyone understands the importance of reporting, because it allows us then to use that data in order to figure out how to actually solve the underlying problems. It also means that we can take advantage of the fact that we've got the excellent video footage, and we have an extraordinarily high rate of conviction against people who have caused violence or other kinds of crimes on Muni. We've got excellent partnership with the police department and with the district attorney's office. There is probably no place in San Francisco where if you do something wrong, you're more likely to actually get caught and be appropriately dealt with than on Muni. So please do invest in taking de-escalation and bystander training and report any incident that you see on our vehicles.
Thank you. I know that we're at our time, and at the risk of taxing your generosity, I did want to give you an opportunity, because you spoke in a compelling way the last time you were with us. If you can give us some sort of update on Sunday metered parking, because I think that it might be of some interest to our listeners.
Yes, so we have been wanting to be very sensitive to the fact that small businesses are struggling and everyone has way too much on their plate. So we know that because we charge for parking in order to make sure that folks can find a parking space, and our parking rates are set at the lowest rate that ensures 1 or 2 parking spaces are available in every block, we know that charging for parking on Sundays and evenings benefits commercial businesses, and if it's done intelligently, can also create better parking availability for congregations. That said, extremely controversial, and what we've been finding is people did not have the mind space in order to deal with it. So we're delaying implementation until we can actually create some space to make sure that folks are comfortable with pursuing the idea. Not quite sure when we're going to bring that back. Obviously, it's something we care very much about because of the revenue reasons, but also, again, because of parking availability being a key driver for recovery. So stay tuned on that. We all have too much on our plates right now.
Thank you, and thank you for that very helpful response. And I just wanted to reaffirm the commitment of the Interfaith Council to be working collaboratively with the agency, on both messaging and facilitating conversation on that particular issue as well as others. We are at the end of our time. We've had a very wonderful conversation. I apologize to anybody whose questions we were not able to get to. We look forward to being together again on September the 9th, when we're going to welcome the San Francisco Assessor Recorder, Joaquin Torres, who is going to speak to the importance and the implications of the special upcoming election ballot. He's going to talk about the role of clergy in navigating paperwork, especially when it comes to wedding petitions, as well as frequently asked questions regarding nonprofit statuses of houses of worship and tax filing. So that should be a very helpful and engaging conversation. This concludes today's briefing. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on September 9th. God bless you and God keep you.